uh, June 7th, and it's time to start harvesting some of the spinach. Uh, you can tell the spinach is getting uh, almost past time to harvest when you start getting it going to seed. This is the spinach going to seed. We have a lot of nice leaves, but can't can't let it go to seed, or it's definitely going to go to ruin. And also, as it gets hotter, it takes a heck of a lot more irrigation. So we just like to get our spinach out of the ground as soon as we can, really. Also, when you get rid of the ones that are starting to head, it leaves a little more room for the ones that aren't heading. This is the corn. We got a few melons in here. We're going to try them in the shade of the corn to see how they do. When the corn is done, which should be in September, those melons will still be growing. Probably be able to pull the corn out of the ground once the corn's done, and get some September sun on the watermelons for a little companion planting action. Uh, we did put a second row of spinach in, but we're not going to waste a lot of water on keeping it going. We're hoping that here's the baby spinach, the second row of baby spinach. Hopefully, the shade from the corn will keep that spinach from requiring too much water and keep it growing at a rate that'll make it tender for us. Um, Oddly enough, the potatoes have outgrown the corn in these rows. These were volunteer potatoes that were left in the ground last year. I was very busy and didn't get to my garden. Now that I have my son with me, we're staying on top of it. But sometimes you have to decide whether to take out some useful plants that are in the way. And this year we're not. I'm not taking out the I'm not going to take out the potatoes until they're grown, which is generally they should be done in August if we don't water them more. If we keep their watering kind of light, they'll be done, and then the corn will be able to catch up. We've got some beans growing. These are a broadleaf. A broad uh, an Italian broad bean. That's a climber. We're going to put some trellises up here soon. We got some wild turnips that are just coming up. That'll make good greens by the fall. This here is a wild pumpkin that we had from the year before. We've had good luck in Zimbabwe. They use the squash leaves, the second and the fourth squash leaf on the leaders for their greens. That's really good in the hot months because for the most part I don't bother with it. Takes so much water to keep turnip greens and other greens tender that I don't normally bother with it, but the squash leaves stay the same amount of tenderness. So if you need a greens in the heat of the summer and you're growing squash anyhow, you might as well just think about that as an alternative. One of the things that is kind of interesting is that we're growing 4 different types of potatoes. Among the potatoes is a blue potato, and you can tell it's the only plant that you can tell is very different in that it has this blue color to it, and it seems to be thriving just as well as the other ones. Forgot what I was doing. I'm getting rid of some of these spinach that are going to seed. We got to pick them, get them out of the picture here. Even in the shade of these potatoes, these guys are going to seed here. I can only guess that they might have gotten a little quicker start. The soil might be a little richer or something. I don't know why they're so much ahead of the other spinaches, but They're probably not that much ahead. We're only talking probably a few days. I'm going to leave quite a bit of the plant left just in case I'm surprised and it'll put out a lot more leaf. We'll keep you posted on how that works out. There's a spinach in the shade of this potato that's trying to get a head going. We will start just clear cutting this row pretty soon, but
what's clear cutting?
I mean just cutting most of it all down, but that's for a birthday party. That's for someone's birthday gift, and it just so happens that their birthday is early next week, so we'll clear cut to give them enough spinach to make them smile. Here's a really nice. Every now and then you get nice pockets of soil where the spinach just really grows luxuriously. This is an example of that. This is how beautiful this spinach is growing here. Both of these are trying to go to head, so we're going to take them out. So we might do a little weeding. We've done a lot of weeding on these. This is not an economic plus. This is more a passion of love here, because you can certainly get a heck of a lot more spinach in the store for the amount of time you'd spend taking all this weeding and doing all this hand labor. It also keeps you out of trouble. Be constructive.
This is the tomato plant that we had for $7, and it was maybe a foot shorter than it is and a lot less bushier. It's doing pretty well. It's cherry tomatoes. It's a good looking plant. Some pea pods. Pea pods have flowers on them.
Yeah. We didn't get our normal amount of warmth, otherwise they'd have already been producing.
That's another volunteer potato plant there. And then these are the watermelon, right?
Yes, those are the watermelon. They're not gonna produce much until September. So, like I said, hopefully the garden will be a lot barer when they're going into fruiting. They'll get more light. Oh, if you want to come here, Mike, these blue potatoes are just starting to get their first flowers. That's what this, if you look, you'll see that they're starting to get their flower heads. That's a sign, that's the next step to make sure, you know, that you can tell they're close to getting picked. They're closer to getting picked. These, here's the flower heads coming on. They look the plant's of the same family as the tomato plant, and it's considered good form companion plant them with tomatoes, because especially in an area where you have longer growing seasons, because the potatoes should get done, and tomatoes will still be growing. They'll grow until they're frosted out.
So it looks like the blue potatoes are going to flower,
Yeah,
and the rest,
yeah, they're going first.
they're going first. Okay.
These blue potatoes that are so growing so well, they're basically from potatoes left in the ground from last year. So,
Do you remember where you got those potatoes? Was it just in a bag of potatoes, or was it seed, or?
I can't remember, but I think I got them as seed potato, and they had the different varieties of seed then.
Okay.
I mean, but they were little potatoes. They were little potatoes.
Right. With the roots, what is it? Is it a sprout or a root? Sprout coming off of it, right? The little white runner that comes off.
Well, you have the potato, and then you put a chunk of it in the ground to grow it. Seed potatoes are just smaller potatoes. It looks like this heavy shade over here didn't slow these down from tasseling at all. Look at this, and this was in the more shaded part of the garden, and these spinaches, even spindly, are going to seed pretty early. Here's our turnip greens. We let so many of them go to seed. We take these each little spike on here is a little pod, like a bean pod, and when they dry out enough, those two sides of the bean pod start to twist, and that will open it up so that the seed falls out. We try and get them when they're dry, but when that thing isn't opened up yet, and then we put it in a box and we shake them all up, and then all the tiny little seed falls to the bottom, and then you pick up all the chaff and you just throw that out, and then you take the seed from the bottom and you put it in a jar and you have it ready for next year. They grow very well through the winter. In the colder months, they're not actually putting on any size, but they survive, and I think the roots are still active. We've got something very interesting going on over here, and that's we had some carrots that were too small to actually cook. So we thought we'd plant them and see if we could get some carrot seeds going. And they decided to cooperate real nice with us. And these big heads are going to be full of seeds. So we're going to have some seeds if we decide to plant carrots from seed this fall or in this next spring. We'll do that. Right here is some cilantro. This cilantro grows here in Michigan.
Where is it?
This is a cilantro right here. Let me pull out some of the weeds around it so you can see it a little better. That's two plants of cilantro.
Oh yeah.
And I noticed that where I live in Michigan, if you go to plant that in the spring, it doesn't seem to do well. But if you let it seed by the wild in the late summer, when it would normally drop its seed, that winter's over, and then it grows nice in the spring. So I think that it's very important to think about timing on your on your plants, because if you put them in at the wrong time, even though it seems like the right time, if you miss that window, then you'll have a lot of bad luck, and so you have to be more careful with that. Here's our four colors of potatoes in rows right here. Here's a mustard green that just is basically weedy. We got our red. This is the red early potato, and this is the Yukon Gold. This is the blue potato, and it's already starting to get its flowers. It's the first of our color to flower. And then this is our russet potato. Also, we didn't mention, but in our garden we have 4 types of corn. We have the red, white, and blue corn, and then the last row is the yellow corn. Looks to me like the white corn has a little bit of a jump on the other colors. That's red, white, blue, and yellow. These are some wild onions. I'm not much of a cook. They weren't wild to begin with, but they've grown in this patch for about 4 years now. I haven't done anything to them. Like I said, if I was more of a cook, I'd chop them up and make onion soup, but I'm a bachelor, so what can I say? They just grow. Here's some wild garlic. Again, I don't do much with it. Here's a big pile of it. We had some potato bugs on these potatoes, I think it was the last 2 weekends. And this week we took them off by hand. And this weekend we don't see any of them. So it wasn't that big of an infestation, and it goes to show that if you have a mild infestation, you might be able to get by just by pulling them off by hand. I guess time will tell. Maybe next week they'll all be eaten up. Who knows? Again, here's some of the turnips going to seed. We had a large number of kale plants. Oh, we had a large number of kale plants that went to seed. This whole row of kale is just from seedlings that went to seed on us. We transplanted them, and we gave a lot away. We have some landscaping plants in here as well. This is a salvia. The bees love the salvia. We have some pinks. That's a nice annual. Monarda. That's one of the workhorses of the garden world here in Michigan. Then we have 2 types of everbearing strawberries. They're very nice because every now and then you get 1 or 2 strawberries. You're not going to get fat eating a few strawberries, and it's quite a nice reward for all your labors that are really not equal to what the market price of foods are. There's a strawberry growing on this one here. These particular, I think a robin redbreast just took a bite of this one. These are the alpine strawberry. They're different. They're very, very teeny weeny little strawberry, and they have like a super flavor, like those artificially, the type that you taste in the cereals, where it has little strawberry bits that have an intense flavor. That's what these are, and they're both everbearing brands. I think these strawberries, all strawberries seem to not like to stay in the same ground. You need to move them about every 2 or 3 years. I'm thinking there's something in the soil that they use up and they need to move on, so they get bored with the same place. We had some volunteer potatoes. Obviously you can tell this one's the blue one. This one's a little bluer than most of them, and I found it somewhere in the garden. We brought it over here. Do you ever stop that thing?
No, it's just rolling.
Okay. You just are gonna edit it, huh?
I guess.
These are the tomato plants that I bought maybe a month ago. When was that we bought that I bought them.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, in our previous videos, there's some. We'll have to catch
They
up.
were
We'll
in
have
the
to
pot.
tell you. Yeah. That we took the little 6-pack that was very teeny weeny, and we put them in a pot. They grew quite well, and then we transplanted them, and then some we just took from the store itself and planted them in the ground, and it's starting to compete with the other ones. So time will tell which one worked out the best. This is pigweed. That's the weed that really gets into the corn crops. Okay. Oh, we should talk about our cherry tree.
Oh yeah.
The cherry tree is starting to get the yellow. The cherries are starting to grow a little bit and a little yellow. We've had a lot of brown rot on it. I don't think it's going to be a good year because we had so much cool and wet. This here is a sign of aphids. What happens when the weather is wacky? The aphids and the predators for the aphids don't hatch at the same time, and so then you get an overabundance of aphids. One year, my neighbor ordered some ladybugs for me to get rid of the aphids, and we released the ladybugs, and nothing happened. And we're thinking, man, what a waste. Well, then about a month later, the hatch from the ladybugs, those ladybugs had larvae. When those larvae hatched, all the aphids were gone off the tree immediately, and there was a larvae. Here's the aphids, and you have the ants protecting them. You can see these ants protecting these aphids. There was a ladybug larvae on each one of these tips of the plant, and there was not an aphid left. So they do work, but again, it's timing. You gotta, just because you do the right thing doesn't mean it's the right timing. And if you don't have the right timing, it's no good. This one here is a goji berry. This is actually it's kind of a vine. There's a little purple flower on it. This is the Chinese medicine. I think they'll sell it for like $24 a pound someplace in some retail stores for the goji berry. It's supposed to be very healthy, and it really grows very vigorously. We just transplanted that one this year, and in the process of transplanting it, we had two other babies had come off of this plant, and I planted them over here. Do you want to see them?
Sure.
What happens?
There's a blueberry.
Yeah, there's a blueberry.
We've got a couple of blueberries over here.
Yep. I don't know if that goji berry.
There's the
Here it
blueberry.
is. Here's one of the little goji berries. What happens is the branches from the goji berry fall over like so many different types of plants. This is it right here. It's just growing in all this. These branches will just fall over and get into the ground, and then they'll root. And so that's one of the babies, and there's one other baby somewhere else. So they can multiply quite a bit on their own. This one here, these are some different landscaping plants. This is a pink everbearing, a pink hardy geranium, and this one will flower from spring until fall. It's another workhorse of the gardening world. And this here is a hosta that has a fragrant bloom. Sometimes people don't think about the fragrance of the landscaping plants, but there's a large number of landscaping plants that have a great smell as well, fragrance. Of the irises, the white and the yellow, particularly the whitish yellow and cream colored ones, have the better fragrances. Of the peonies, maybe the older varieties of pink ones have the better ones. The roses, generally the pink roses, which is the native color of the rose, that seems to be the better fragrance one. Butterfly bushes are fragrant. There's honeysuckle. A lot of different plants are fragrant. This is our first year of this hops plant growing. This is considered the standard which all other hops are measured by in Michigan. It's called the Chinook. There are a lot of other hardy varieties, but for this particular plant came out way ahead of all the other ones. Here's the next closest plant. We've had 5 Chinook planted in this row, and 2 of the others came out, but then either cutworms cut them off or something. I don't know what it was, but they seem to not thrive. So we only got 3 out of 5. This one here is a Magnum, and it's none of them are as vigorous as that one Chinook plant. Here's the Magnum here and there. The commercial market on hops prices just kind of collapsed with oversupply, so it's more of a hobby than an interest. Here's some irises that are variegated. They're not doing that well because I cut them a little too late. But they're a pretty iris, and they're variegated. They have a blue flower that has a great fragrance, a very light blue flower that has a great fragrance, but as you can see, they're not doing that well. These are all volunteer potatoes from the year before. I can only tell you that volunteer potatoes definitely do a lot. They come up a lot earlier than if you were to plant them generally. If you plant them in the spring, unless you plant them real early. So I'd say that you can't plant these potatoes too early because they seem to know when the frost is coming, and they generally avoid it. This here is amaranth. That's one of the big grains like quinoa and everything else. Oddly enough, it's very much related to this. I'm thinking that's shepherd's purse or something, I don't know, but you can eat the greens off of this one. I'm going to read up and see if you can eat the greens on that one, but this has big heads. I've never done anything with them, but it's pretty, and one of these days I think I'd like to do something with them. We're probably going to weed some of this, but here's a turnip that probably grew from seed this spring, so before June is out, we probably could get some turnip greens. And then, like I said, I don't like to waste a lot of water on greens. So July, August, and September are basically months that I won't eat or mess with the greens, other than I might try the squash. And like I said, I'm not much of a cooker anyhow.
So all this red is amaranth.
Amaranth, yep. Yep. Oh, I didn't tell you about. I was starting to tell you about these beans, these Italian beans. These are gonna grow. I've had them on a trellis 10 feet high. They probably grow 12 to 16 feet maybe, easily. I've had this thing up 10 feet to where everything in here didn't even grow because it made such a dense shade. I'm not gonna let them shade this garden out this year, but these beans, it's a broad Italian. It's Italian broad bean, but these are runner types. They make a very good green bean. You just have to catch them early. And then if you like regular beans, they make the most tender bean if you pick them right when they get to their full size, but they haven't dehydrated any. So when they're a fresh full bean, you can eat the green and you can eat the bean inside without having to shell it. And it's almost like eating beans. It's a little bit like edamames, but this Italian bean, broad bean, has a really wonderful flavor. Then if you miss them as green beans and you miss them as a nice full flavored green bean, they'll die off, and they'll just stay on the vine like this, and you can eat them as a dry bean later on, anytime during the next year. So these beans have a nice shelf life, and they are a vegetable protein, which is good to balance your diet with. Yeah, these I picked any of them that were really good. I already picked them, but these here have a in the fall. Some of them will get, if they don't have enough sun, or for whatever reason, when they're frosted, they get this dark color. When they're not frosted, they'll have a tan color. So they'll be very light. So it's all the more reason to try and pick them when they're ripe, in the fall when they first make. Look at this. This is a Rosa Sharon. It's growing. It's growing, and it doesn't even have any root. There's just a little bit of root here, but we had such a rainy, cool spring that piece stayed cut off for a long time and didn't lose its root. We ought to look at that maple tree that we used as a marker and see what the root on that one looks like. That's kind of interesting.
Right. And these cucumbers.
These are the cucumbers. I mostly try and take the cucumbers and put them in a saltwater brine and let them mature into what's called a natural pickle. So it's more of a probiotic meal, similar to what the Koreans and the Germans would have. The Koreans are big on like kimchi, which is a fermented cabbage similar to sauerkraut. And then they have the Orientals have the daikon tomato, daikon radish, which is one of the earliest things to grow in the garden, and then they'll ferment that, and it's a lot easier to digest when it's fermented. The cucumbers require a heck of a lot of water, and so if I put them in partial shade, they seem to be a little happier. So if you have places that are shady, more shady, they'll tolerate it better. In the season, you have to be really on top of picking their pickles, because if we get a lot of rain, sometimes they'll be mature in 3 days, and then they'll start turning yellow on you and get tougher. Let's look at the peach tree frosted out. So that's the peach tree totally frosted out, but the thornless blackberries, which are very vigorous, are going to have a